fantasy short stories. Of Monsters and Mushrooms by Lesley Herron. Chapter 6, A Short-Tempered Toddler in Full Tactical Gear. Trust me, it's foolproof. 347. That's the number of times Brig had heard a merc utter those words after explaining the most harebrained, cockamamie plan where going horribly wrong was the only foolproof thing about it. Ignoring that at least 300 of those times came from his best buddy, the little merc that stood before him couldn't hope to measure up to any of those others, even with a booster seat. If Granny Sadie had been short, this Evan character had to be the runt of the litter as he stood barely a hair over 2 feet tall.
Not to belittle your plan.
Brig paused when the tiny merc narrowed gray eyes in his direction.
But this sounds like a really bad idea.
He winced, jabbing a thumb over at his buddy.
And I run with this guy.
His attention faltered at the sight of Attila, swallowing hard and appearing uncharacteristically green around the gills. Their newly hired discount associate shook his curly mop of blonde hair, glancing up from his position behind the lanky merc as he adjusted the final strap on the harness. "What's wrong with it? He said Beanstalk here is a demolitions expert, so we just lower him out the window." Attila's cheeks bulged with a less-than-dry heave. "Down to the detention floor beneath us. He drills a few holes in the wall, slides in the quarter sticks of TNT, and bing, bang, boom!" Evan tossed his hands in the air with an excited jump, emphasizing that last word. "We swing in and grab the target before the guard gets back from lunch. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy." Maybe if the pint-sized gun for hire had managed his reassurances without the lisp that gave his words a baby talk quality, Brig might have felt more confident about this plan. Instead, the tiny merc came off as a short-tempered toddler in full tactical gear, explaining his need for his binky and a nap-nap. Brig leaned over, looking out of the open floor-to-ceiling window, and stared down at the city 33 stories beneath them, putrid yellow smog obscuring many of the buildings. They were perfectly positioned, almost above Vel Suite, just a little off to one side. But this was the closest office they could find to their target on the Sanitation and Public Health floor. The thick layers of dust told them the wing had been abandoned for years. That's not to say that finding the right room had been an easy task. As they say, 23rd time's the charm. Brig ran a beefy hand down his face.
I get that. It's just...
"Less yapping, more exploding." Evan finished tightening the harness around the gangly merc and gave the straps a firm tug. "Oh yeah. Those aren't going anywhere." He then nudged Beanstalk towards the gaping window. Attila's palms hit the edge of the frame, and he teetered over the abyss. His view of the city warbled as his palms began to sweat. A little noise, and a little pee, more than last time, escaped him before he collapsed backwards in a heap, scooting away from the window until his back hit the far wall. With a sigh, Brig approached his catatonic friend.
"I was gonna say..."
He glanced between the perplexed doctor and the confused toddler merc.
"Attila's got a thing about heights, don't you, buddy?"
Not until the meaty hand clapped him on his shoulder did Attila stop his attempts to scoot through the cheap drywall. Eye locked on nothing in the distance, he removed his hat and began spinning it absently in his hands as he mumbled nonsense to no one. A thin mechanical arm rose from beneath his poncho, and Veronica gently stroked his hair. "You could have mentioned that during the planning phase." Evan rolled his eyes as he hopped off of the empty to-shred bin he'd been using as a stool. Eric, doing his best to remain out of the way, raised a hand from his corner of the room.
We had a planning phase?
Whatever. Evan waved his tiny hands dismissively and began tugging the harness off the gibbering idiot. That just means you gotta do it, big guy. Rig barked a hearty laugh.
And who's gonna lower me down? Attila's gonna be useless for at least 30 minutes, and the doc has less muscle than an anorexic stick bug. Hey!
Evan looked down at his own hands, debating if he could manage the task. In the end, he figured better safe than sorry. This was his first real job, after all, and it wouldn't look good on his resume if he lost a client for being a bit on the chunky side. All right, then Four Eyes can do it.
What? I'm the one that hired you!
Eric shoved his hands on his hips.
Why don't you do it?
Because the drill is almost as big as I am. Now shut up and nut up. Do you want to bust your brother out or not? Unable to find any other easy or sane options, Eric relented with a huff. He let the tiny merc strap him in and accepted the supplies from Attila. Rather, Veronica. She used her thin mechanical arm to hand over the concrete drill, 4 sticks of TNT, and enough detonator cord to nearly reach the marble steps on the ground below.
Just don't drop me.
No amount of confidence graced those words as he approached the window.
You kidding?
Rig flexed his meteoric biceps.
Thunder and lightning ain't failed me yet.
Filled with unashamed whimpers, Eric slid free from the window and found himself face to face with the exterior wall, drill in one hand and a stack of explosives in the other. He stared at the concrete for a solid minute before he realized he had no idea what to do. He looked up, whisper shouting,
Now what?
Now what? Evan's tiny face peered over the sill, rolling his eyes once more. You used that, he pointed to the hand holding the drill, to put holes in the wall where you'll then stick those, he gestured to the doctor's other hand, and then attach the detonator cord. It's not brain surgery.
I know how to do brain surgery.
Well, then this should be easy, Evan grumbled. Shimmy over to your brother's cell and drill some holes in the wall in an X.
Okay, so I go left?
Right.
Wait, I go right?
No! Oh my God, I swear, rocks are smarter than you. Evan grabbed at the ends of his hair. This job better be worth a photo on the family wall of fame. Go to the left.
Okay.
Eric let out a grumble as the tiny merc retreated, then shifted into position. Pinching his tongue between his teeth, he settled the tip of the drill into place just beneath the small window of Vel's suite and squeezed the trigger. It whirred to life, the metal of the bit squeaking angrily against the concrete. He hoped Frankie had decided to enjoy his lunch down in the lobby floor cafeteria, because their break Vel out of prison plan was not a quiet one. Eventually, he managed a series of holes in a rather rough X-shape pattern and slotted the 8-inch sticks into the wall until only their tips remained visible. A quick splice with the detonation cord, his fingers moving deftly with the skill of a surgeon dangling 200 feet in the air, and Eric released a shaky laugh, and the word, "Done!" erupted from him a little more urgently than he wanted. True to his word, Brig, aided by thunder and lightning, hauled Eric up with the speed of a motorized winch. Not a moment later, the doctor clutched that musty, stain-riddled carpet even tighter than Attila. Took you long enough. Evan snatched away the cord and produced a shining flip-top lighter from one of the many pockets of his vest. Decided to do some sightseeing. Eric watched as the braided rope began to spark.
It takes time to drill holes that deep.
What do you mean? Quarter sticks are only like an inch long. Evan frowned, the flame from his lighter snuffing out with the exasperated sigh he threw in the doctor's direction.
No, they're not.
Eric paused. then looked over to Attila, still unresponsive on the floor, a line of small red cylinders decorating the ground in front of him like a spilled pot of mini hot dogs. "Aw, hell." Boom! The resulting shock shook the building. Glass and drywall erupted around them. They dove to the ground, hands over their heads. Someone screamed. There were more shouts and terrified hollers as the tremors traveled downwards. "What kind of idiot can't recognize full sticks of TNT?" Evan peeked out from beneath his hands as the building stilled, watching a thin line of dust cascade down from the ceiling tiles. A few of them had been knocked loose from the blast, and several cables and vent tubes spilled free like mechanical entrails. He turned towards the window, or what remained of it. Carefully, Evan peered out through the open gap to see the wall below had been blown out as planned, but the spreading web of cracks filled him with concern. Well, it would have if something else hadn't replaced his worry. "Hey, Eric?" He slowly turned, gesturing for the idiot doctor to join him by the window. Eric lifted his hands to his head and shook the dust and glass from his hair as he stood. He approached the tiny merc with a questioning lift of the brow. When Evan only pointed a finger out and down through the open window, he could do nothing but follow the gesture. "Does that look like left to you?" Evan hauled back on his hand and slapped the doctor in the shin as hard as he could. Balance lost, Eric windmilled his arms before he toppled back, landing hard on his rump. "Ow!" He rubbed at the spot the kid had struck. "I thought you meant your left." Unsure why his granny was angry at him, because surely she must have been to saddle him with this group of morons for his first mission, Evan sank his hands into his curly hair and let out a frustrated stream of curse words, insults, and a few choice comments about their mothers. Crack! Paused mid-tirade, he glanced down at the yellowing carpet beneath their feet and realized it held more than just mold beneath it. Uh-oh. Brig had just lifted a finger, ready to chastise the little guy for uttering the forbidden phrase, when the floor gave way. Thankfully, their very manly screams were drowned out by the collapse of concrete and support beams, and the four of them were unceremoniously dropped into the vacant cell below. The dividing wall separated them on the wrong side of Vel's suite. Eric could tell without even looking when a yet-to-be-emptied bucket was sent flying, splattering the floor and walls with a rainbow of unspeakable sludge and reigniting a smell that could be classified as a war crime. Evan clambered out from beneath Beanstalk and dusted off the front of his vest, readjusting his bandana, and turned to survey the room. The others were alive, if a little bruised and slightly bloody. But technically, their plan had worked. They were standing in the detention level. He stared up at a perfect 5x5 hole in the outer wall of the prison cell. A 32-story drop before them, locked cell door behind them, and the floor above them was too high to climb back up. But hey, the plan had worked. He pinched the bridge of his nose, more for the frustration than the smell, and sighed. Their entire exit strategy had taken a dive into that rainbow-coated bucket. Son of a tax accountant! From the cell next to theirs, a gravelly voice called out, "What the hell is going on over there? Anyone hurt?" Deciding his employers weren't in any danger of wandering off, Evan shrugged and stepped through the bars and into the open space of the jail. He glanced into the darkness of the next cell and grinned. "That you, Tin Man?" "Wait a minute." Vel's voice went up in surprise as he approached. "Half pint? Who let you out of the playpen?" "Hey!" Evan threw a pointed finger at Vel through his own bars. "What did I say would happen next time you made a short joke?" "Bring it, Pound Cake." Vel grinned as he dropped to a squat, holding out his mechanical hand in an offering fist bump.
Good to see you, buddy.
The two proceeded through the motions of their ridiculous handshake. Bump it, slap the back, fly high, explosion into a dive bomb, before curiosity took over and he asked,
"What are you doing here?"
"Oh, you know." Evan rummaged through the pockets of his tactical vest. "Just breaking some loser out of jail." The cyborg's expression fell.
"Please tell me it's Fungus Pete in cell 23.
"Well?" Eric regained his senses and staggered to his feet, moving to the door to press his face against the bars.
"Vel, we're here to break you out."
A loud clang punctuated the silence as Vel's forehead hit metal bars in frustration.
Damn it, Eric. I told you to leave me alone. Do you have any idea how much trouble you will be in?
He paused, groaning.
How much trouble I will be in if you get caught doing this.
About that. Finding his lockpick set at last, Evan moved back to Attila's old cell and began picking the lock to free his employers from their impromptu incarceration. Ain't no way someone didn't hear that explosion.
Eric, please, you need to go.
Vel's grip tightened on the bars as he tried to angle his head enough to look down the hall to where Frankie would eventually return from his lunch break.
This is a really bad idea. No, I'm not leaving without you, so stop being so...
Eric bit back a few choice words.
So you, and just come with me. Even if I wanted to, what do you think will happen when they find my cell empty, huh? Oh, well, I guess he got away this time. Ha! I'll be labeled as a fugitive. I won't be able to show my face in the city. You're screwing with my life.
He slammed a fist against the bars.
Again!
As Evan found the last tumbler, the lock clicked and the door swung open. Dude has a point.
No, he doesn't.
Eric stomped past the tiny mark and met his brother face to face.
It won't matter that you can't come back if you never need to. Come with me. This time will be different.
He searched those mismatched eyes, silently pleading with the man. Vel stared at his sibling for a long moment, desperately wanting to believe him.
Eric, you're the smartest dumbass I know.
He let out a long sigh.
You couldn't help Dad, and you can't help me.
He stepped back, folding his arms over his chest.
I'm not leaving.
Evan looked up at the pair. So, am I picking the lock or no? He rubbed his hand over his mouth, keeping his frustration from spilling out, when Eric had finally settled on a nod. His brother would be joining them on this trip, one way or another. And, as he was about to tell Brig to get some rope ready, the sounds of a straw gurgling the last dregs of liquid broke through the silence, and they all turned. Frankie stood in the doorway, slurping at a comically small juice box with a wide, satisfied smile on his face. The straw pulled away from his lips with a pop, and he pointed a finger, the one holding his drink, at the intruders.
I think the madam will be very excited to meet you.
If any of them had thought the ride in the elevator had been uncomfortable before, this time surely took the cake. Each ding of passing floors rang out as loud as the final nail hammered into a coffin. Eric swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably as he watched the numbers above the door tick over.
Bing bong, floor 87. Lair of she who binds fate to her own madness and treads where even gods dare not trespass.
Well, boys, this is your stop.
Eric blinked away the terror tears from his eyes as Frankie jabbed a meaty finger into his spine, and he stumbled through the open elevator doors, the manacles around his wrist clinking angrily. He spun, returning his attention to the giant guard. That description was just to scare people, right? Frankie smiled at the tiny squeak in the elf's voice and remained silent, using his boot to nudge out the tiny dwarf. The silence, the sadistic grin, the manacles, it all became too much for Eric, and he shot a look down at their pint-sized associate. Right? Unfazed by the innocent white walls and sparkling tiles, Evan just shrugged. No idea, man. Nobody I know has ever seen this woman, including Granny, and she knows everyone. Fat fingers dug into Attila's shoulder, forcing him out of the elevator. He sniffed, feeling much more himself now that he wasn't in any danger of being held out over an open chasm. He spun as his buddy was convinced out onto the floor, his wrists bound with rope and several double-hitch half-granny with a sheepshank knots. Frankie couldn't find manacles large enough to fit. The four of them, Vel had been spared the trip, as he technically hadn't done anything wrong, stared at the giant guard as they stood on the polished landing, confusion setting in. Frankie simply pointed between them, not daring to exit the lift himself.
End of the hall. Giant door. You can't miss it.
He hit a button on the panel, and as the doors began to close, he offered them one last piece of advice with a smirk.
Don't make her wait. She hates that.
As the elevator shut, Eric moved to hit the call button, only to discover there was none. They were trapped. Well, what now? As Veronica worked her magic to unlock the manacles around his wrists, Attila spun in a full circle, taking in the vastness of the hallway. And the glorious items on display. I vote we loot this place. Look at all this junk. His shackles clattered to the floor, and he gave that thin little mechanical arm a high five as he bounded towards the nearest pedestal. His mind understandably preoccupied with his impending demise, Eric hadn't really looked at the hallway when he was forced into it. Now he scrutinized his surroundings with a deeper look. Is that? His jaw fell open as he approached it. A nuclear missile? Sure enough, he pulled to a stop not an inch closer to that 11-foot-long metallic torpedo-shaped bomb. Beneath the time-faded paint and scorch marks, he made out the words, B-61 Mod 3 Tactical Thermonuclear Bomb. His eyes landed on a little sticky note that adorned the nose of the thing, written with the words, Do Not Drop, underlined for emphasis, and even included a tiny doodle of a mushroom cloud. Eric backed away from the thing. The realization that their antics could have ended so much worse sank in, and he let out a shaky breath. Let's just, see how this meeting goes, yeah? Between the ominous floor description and this possibly active nuke, stealing from this woman didn't sound like the brightest course of action. The 60-kiloton paperweight wasn't the only thing on display in the madam's trophy room. As they shuffled down the long, brightly lit hallway, they passed by ancient tribal artifacts, a barnacle-encrusted figurehead of a pirate ship, the skull of a giant horned beast, a bejeweled gauntlet made from pure gold, though obviously fake, and even, for some reason, a half-eaten corn dog above a plaque that read, A Worthy Foe. They passed dozens of these arbitrary souvenirs on their way to the large double doors at the end of the hall, each one leaving Eric more confused, more terrified, and rethinking all his life choices. When their procession came to a stop before those menacing, albeit plain, wooden doors, he reached up to knock. They swung open before his knuckles touched the surface, and he swallowed hard. Brig raised both hands, still tied together, and rubbed at the cold sweat pouring down the back of his neck.
Maybe she was expecting us?
Over the threshold, they stepped into a penthouse suite-sized throne room. Beneath elegantly draped fabric, held up by golden effigies, sat a tall-back, gold and black velvet chair atop a dais. The polished marble floors were bare of any runners or rugs and reflected the light from the diamond-encrusted chandelier that hung above their heads. The surrounding candelabras flickered to life as they approached. Above the throne, like a grotesque marionette, hung the ancient bones of a giant skeleton, wrapped in gossamer cloth, gold finery, and precious gems. And flanking either side of the giant puppet stood two obelisk black skeletons that stared down at them from over the pommels of their upturned swords. The silence in the room became palpable, despite Eric's attempts to garner the attention of the judicator of their transgressions with several loud ahems. Uncomfortable in the moment, Attila belted out a nervous chuckle and followed it up with a well-timed joke. "Looks like we're boned, guys." When the others just stared at him, his smile became a little less. "Get it? 'Cause of the bones?" He hardly noticed that the others had failed to laugh at his perfectly funny joke. No, Attila was much too focused on the chilling sensation that flew up the back of his neck, making his toe hairs stand on end. In the back of his mind, the river roared as a tide of possibilities threatened to overflow the banks and drown him in a flood of information. He wrenched off his eye patch, and Veronica cycled through the various visual spectrums. Gamma? Nope. X-ray? Nope. Attila scanned around, searching for the cause of that nagging at the back of his mind. Ultraviolet? Nope. He stopped, catching sight of movement at last. Veronica, go back! A figure, invisible to the naked eye, weaved its way towards the throne and them. In a twist he had not foreseen happening with his first paranormal encounter, Attila licked his lips. The ghost was female, very naked, and had the kind of curves he wanted to drive around on all night. Her hips swayed without gravity, with the grace of an underwater mermaid, and he began to follow her, his body moving without his brain. Even the bounce of her bzzz, his HUD flickered, and maybe it was the fritzing of his electronics that caught her attention, or the totally manly scream that burst from his totally manly body, but she turned to look at him over her shoulder. A lance of pain shot up through Attila's skull, and error message after error message followed as Veronica attempted to stabilize her operating system. The ghostly woman continued her waltz to the throne, stepping into the hanging corpse without a second glance back. Her ephemeral body twisted and distorted, morphing to fit itself into the creature she now possessed. A final torrent of errors slammed into Attila's HUD moments before the entire thing crashed, and Veronica's thin arm lost power and dropped. It hung impotently from the bottom of his poncho, swinging on a non-existent breeze. Brig raised a disapproving eyebrow at the almost indecent display.
You okay there, buddy?
A voice like a desert storm tearing away the last vestige of flesh from a mummified carcass boomed around them, forcing them all to their knees.
Kneel, for I am Madam Whisper, and your souls hang by the thread of my whim.
Gentle blue light emanated from within the hanging skeleton, its eyes filling with an endless void of dying stars. A series of cracks rang out like gunshots as the body began to snap itself back together beneath that gossamer shroud. With a jolt, the desecrated limbs pulled free from their restraints, and the tyrant lord of Guttertown lowered herself into the throne.
Tell me, little morsels.
Her head snapped into position, and she adjusted the intricate golden crown atop her head.
Why do you have the misfortune of being in my presence? Murder? Thievery?
Her skull twitched, almost an involuntary shudder at the thought.
Tax evasion?
Meekly raising his hand, Eric offered this terrifying figure a trembling wave. Hello, Miss Whisper? Madam Whisper? There must have been a clerical error. Another gunshot crack rang out as she raised her hand, cutting off the little man's terrified words, though she hardly paid him closer attention. Her eye sockets flashed briefly, and she dropped her arm with a series of pops.
You blew a hole in my home, and then tried to kidnap a guest from my compulsory visitor suites.
Her eyes flashed again.
Poorly, I might add.
Evan grumbled something under his breath that resembled, "Like to see you do a better job." But it died beneath the low, rumbling growl as Madam Whisper's entire body turned in the doctor's direction, her gaze fixing on him fully for the first time.
You!
She flew through the air, the tattered and frayed ends of her ragged garments fluttering behind her like the sails of a ghost ship, the wind howling through them. She grabbed Eric by his ear and dragged him into the air, within an inch of her skull, and breathed in deep.
How? Why? Are you here to kill me?
Eric's legs kicked in the open air, several feet off the ground, his hands scrabbling to hold onto her arm as pain jolted through him. She breathed him in again.
Not that you could. Not without her.
Madam Whisper shook the doctor once more, overlooking his pathetic yelps, to dive the fingers of her free hand into his mouth. She pried open his jaw and peered inside.
Empty?
She moved that hand to tug at the strands of white in his bangs, pulling them back as she sniffed at his hairline.
No. Nothing here. Who are you?
Brig nudged his buddy.
I think the madam here might be 2 eggs short of an omelet.
She cracked her neck sideways, staring down at the dapper fool on his knees beside the others.
I don't know you.
Her skull snapped back into the upright position, and she dropped the doctor.
Any of you?
She shook free the limbs of her body, the series of noises resembling a bag of popcorn in the microwave.
Wrong. This is all wrong.
Rubbing at his sore ear, Eric stumbled back a step. He glanced at the others and, with a nod of his head, motioned for them to follow. Sorry to disturb you. We'll just leave and let you get back to stuff. Clarity returned to her. Madam Whisper collapsed into her throne.
Back indeed, to the matter at hand.
She pointed a bony finger at each of them, sentencing them with brutal efficiency.
Death, and dismemberment.
Eric audibly gulped as that final word and pointed gesture landed on him. Wait! Evan jumped to his feet and strode forward, fishing something out of his vest. Eric nearly fainted from relief. Good old Evan, here to save the day. I have a permit! Just for me, though. That 2-bit backstabbing quarter stick of a useless merc. Reaching down with her claw-like fingers, she delicately took the tiny piece of paper he held out to her and pulled it close to one eye, reading it carefully.
Very well. You're excused.
She handed him back his permit. She then exploded to her feet, her hands flying into the air.
For the rest of you, death. Death by snails. Because I hate that one's face.
Attila followed her pointed gesture to shoot Eric a dirty look. Couldn't leave your bro behind and just go to Pale Point? No!
Pale Point?
Madame Whisper paused, looking at Eric.
Why Pale Point?
Unsure how a skeleton without muscles, tendons, or flesh could narrow its eyes at him, Eric turned his focus on a plausible deception. I'm tracking an anomaly, and it came from there? Yep, perfect lie, he thought with a groan.
Interesting.
She stroked her bottom jaw thoughtfully, her attention flickering over to a windowless wall. More than a minute passed, the giant skeleton just lost in thought. The tension became unbearable, and Eric gave in. Why is that interesting? Do you know...
What?
Her attention refocused on the doctor slowly, as a plan burned to life in her mind.
Oh, no reason.
The way Eric could tell she was smiling at him did not fill him with any amount of calm or reassurance.
I will give you and your associates a choice. Death by snails, or solve a little problem for me.
Attila raised a hand, his third arm still swinging low. I vote for problem-solving. He encouraged his best buddy to agree with a well-placed elbow in the gut and grinned back at the skeletal figure. Before I say yes, with a little quick thinking, Eric straightened his back. Every adventure party needs 5 members. It's a rule. And we have 1, 2, he pointed at each of them in turn, 3, 4. The prisoner? He stumbled over the word as the madam visibly shook with anger and corrected himself. Visitor! The visitor we were attempting to break out of Suite 10 is our 5th. Madame Whisper chuckled as she returned to her throne. She rang a golden handbell, and a tiny door behind the curtains opened up. A furry, black, imp-like creature, wearing an adorable bellhop uniform, scampered forward, and she leaned down to speak.
Release the guest from Visitor Suite 10 and bring them up here.
She returned her attention to the gaggle of home destroyers and folded her bony fingers into her lap.
A mission for your lives, the 5 of you.
She shifted her gaze to the tiny, permit-bearing dwarf, indicating he was now wrapped up in this as much as the others.
Fail, and no amount of fast-talking, bribing, or running will save you. No corner of this world, or those beyond, will be haven.
Ma'am, if I might ask... Brig resisted the urge to scream out when her focus snapped to him, but when she didn't protest, he continued,
What exactly is our mission? Oh, it's quite an easy one.
Her hands sprang to the armrests of her golden throne, fingers skittering along their length like 10 little feet.
I just need you to take care of a few bugs, is all.
Bugs? The high-pitched tone in Eric's voice told everyone he was seriously reconsidering the snails. Thank you for listening to Of Monsters and Mushrooms, the rewrite of Book 1 by Lesley Herron. Join us as we post new chapters roughly every other week. If you would like to listen to the entire book or her other novels in the series, you can do so at talltaletv.com/series or by using the link in the description.
I'm just saying, she probably has a lot of skeletons in her closet. Eh?
Is that a pun?
Don't start. Oh, don't be so sternum. Just a bit of light ribbing between friends.
Dude, no.
She could still be listening.
Really? You think she might be spying on us?
Buddy, stop this before someone gets hurt.
Fine. I can tell you're not in a humorous mood. Enough jaw flapping. Let's blow this joint.
I will leave you behind.
Seriously, no more. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't mind going back there and giving her a good bone. Bone? Get it? What is wrong with you?
Yeah, no, that was just wrong.
Wait, oh, right, no! You guys didn't see what she looked like before. Ghost boobies, guys. Ghost boobies.
Just nasty.